Hello, and welcome to Explorations in Economic History. And this is an extra session on war communism to specifically discuss the lessons that leaders came away with. And a good part of this is based on my book, Rediscovering Fire. So you can always look to that book to learn a little bit more. So, about the war communist period, Trotsky wrote in 1936 that even if there had been revolution around the world in places such as Germany, he said it can be said with certainty it would still have been necessary to renounce direct state distribution of products, in other words, planning, in favor of methods of commerce or markets. So, even if there had been revolution around the world, he realized that it was a mistake to try to attempt central planning right away. So as Lenin said, we made the mistake of deciding to go over directly to communist production and distribution. So they admitted that it was a mistake to immediately attempt to plan the economy. However, Lenin argued, and this is from, I think, 1919, Lenin argued that you can learn from your mistakes. Just because they admit a mistake, it doesn't mean that they can never attempt again to approach things the same way. So, in other words, even if there are problems with central planning that they ran into, serious problems, it doesn't mean that central planning can't work. As Lenin said, the whole point is that we have yet to learn the art of approach. There were glaring mistakes in the plans, but the efficient economist, instead of penning empty theses, will get down to a study of facts and figures, analyze the practical experience, pinpoint mistakes, and suggest a remedy. So keeping in mind Lenin's point that you can learn from your mistakes, it is amazing to see how Austrian predictions about the socialist economy were echoed in the quotes by the Soviet leaders and planners and by the sympathetic witnesses. So Mises said that a socialist management of production, planners wouldn't know whether their plans were efficient, and planners would operate in the dark, as it were. Now, Barbara Wooten, who is the sympathetic observer, during the 1930s wrote about how the Supreme Economic Council had to make guesses in the dark. For the exact same reason. They were speaking about the same thing, and they happened to use the exact same words to describe what it was like for Soviet planners. And even more specifically, Mises, again speaking about this essentially the same problem, used the railroads as an example. And Mises said, picture the building of a new railroad. Should it be built at all? And if so, which out of a number of conceivable roads should be built? And so on and so forth. Now, Trotsky in the 1930s, but speaking about the war communism period, used the same example because it was something they had actually had this problem at the time, specifically the problem with railways. And Trotsky said that by following a plan, they ran the risk of losing all control over, or all information about, what was necessary and what was not, what was profitable and what was not. He even termed, because of course he's thinking about costs and benefits. And he said which line should be expanded and which one contracted. They had none of this information. And he concluded by saying only by maintaining a profit and loss balance between the various sectors of the railway network, and coupled with the same sort of balance among other branches of the economy, so that they would have prices to work with, looking at their inputs and making comparisons, and so on and so forth. Now, Trotsky did say that it was only for the time being that they would need this, but you have to sort of see it as the only reason that it would only be for the time being is because he had faith that eventually they would learn, or would be able to overcome this problem, maybe after human nature had changed, and so on. And what were some of the other lessons learned? Well, one thing that they learned was that setting all wages to the level of the ordinary workman, which they spoke about and took to be very important, well, it resulted in a lack of skilled labor, as people didn't bother to gain skills because they wouldn't be paid more for it, and also the inability to induce workers into the areas of the economy where they were needed, because differential wages, as a natural mechanism through the profit and loss mechanism, normally pulls workers into the areas where they're needed. So they're more enticed to work in that area for a higher wage, even though they slightly, don't enjoy it as much. They're willing to do it for a higher wage. Or if a certain area is flooded with workers, the wage falls and people go elsewhere. Another lesson that they learned is the difficulty of maintaining democracy under conditions of having to plan the economy and having to stick to a specific plan. So one thing they learned was that democracy within the state enterprises was more difficult than they thought, and they were forced to introduce one-man management in order to have greater efficiency. And also they learned that it was difficult to plan the economy and take into account what individuals wanted through voting and through factory councils and so on, and still be able to bring together all the different parts of the plan and produce the different things that were required based on the needs of other parts of the plan, if they also were going to take into account the voting at the bottom level. So this was all a lot more difficult than they had expected. Another lesson they learned was on the use of money. The idea that money should be eliminated, and as Gregory Zinoviev proudly said, we are approaching the complete abolition of money because they were introducing payments in kind, was naive, and that in fact an in-kind exchange economy is a barter economy, which is chaotic and inefficient and wasteful. And incredible inflation came from many of their policies, which they ignored because they were hoping to abolish money. But in fact, they had inflation and then money shortages, and the return to the barter economy often happened because of failed policies and because of the problems that they were incurring and the destruction of their currency, and was not a positive step on the road to socialism as they had been insisting that it was. So they were returning to a crude system of barter, and they began to realize this and eventually stopped saying things like was said at the Congress of the Soviet of National Industry. The People's Commissar of Finance in 1918 had said, "Finance should not exist in a socialistic community, and I must therefore apologize for speaking on the subject." So they stopped doing that as much as they began to realize the waste incurred in a barter economy. They learned a few different lessons here. They learned that the elimination of money made it more difficult to arrange production. They learned that inequality can persist even without money, because people can have an inequality of stuff, and that can even sometimes be worse because stuff can be rare, and that can make it even more worth even more, and people can become even more envious. And attempts at worker control over money were also problematic, especially the problem of eliminating interest, which was a major cause of theirs before the revolution. And this ties in with the soft budget constraint that Alec Nove talks about. And he goes into some of the detail, and I go into some of the detail in my book, about the importance of interest or capital charges. So again, it helps you to determine the true costs, or at least more closely to have a little bit of a better chance of determining the true costs. You still might have problems in a socialist economy in terms of determining prices, but the capital charge or interest is a very important part of determining the costs for a comparison between two projects. Also, the interest payment stimulates efficient use of resources and ensures efficient use of resources, because if a company can't pay back, if a project can't pay back the interest, then they won't be able to continue. And when they are able to, when someone is able to earn interest, then they're able to continue to make other kinds of efficient investments, because that can always get put back into to their investment strategy. So Sovietologist Alec Nove on this said that a capital charge has both macro and microeconomic effects, and reminds one that the distinction between these categories is often blurred. And so this is the multiple uses of interest, and why, like other prices in the economy, it has a self-regulation effect. It's self-regulatory and provides efficient macro and micro uses.